So Louise Drumm is an associate professor in the Department of Learning and Teaching Enhancement. She leads the MSc in Blended and Online Education and also teaches on the postgrad certificate in Teaching and Supporting Learning programme. She's worked in a number of universities in the UK as a learning technologist, as an academic developer, a lecturer and a software developer. She's also an experienced theatre director and practitioner, and engages in creative approaches to academic development, research and teaching. Her research interests include the relationship between digital education and theory, critical digital pedagogy, open educational practices, digital literacies and academic development. Louise, welcome. We can see the title of your paper in front of us. The stage is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fiona, and hello, everybody. Thanks so much for coming along today. So after that introduction, I suppose that the first thing I want to say is that I am not by any means a Freirean scholar, nor am I a Boal scholar, but what I'm going to do today is to talk a little bit about my practice and some of the things that I've done using theatre of the oppressed in particular in relation to exploring areas within education, specifically higher education, a little bit with staff and a little bit with students as well. So stand by. I've got a little activity in my presentation for you. So I'm going to be asking you to follow a Mentimeter link. So have your fingers ready to do a little bit of typing. And I'm going to be sharing the resources that I have, some of them as I go. So I'm going to be multitasking and I'm going to be pasting stuff in the link in the chat. But I've also got references at the end. I've got my Twitter handle there. If you're on the Twitter machine, please do get in contact if you wish. And I've also got a website there where I've hosted some of the scripts and some explanations and guidance of some of the things that I've done in my workshops. So no excuse if you want to contact me, please do, or if you want to just give me a shout, that would be fine. So I'm going to start with a few quotes. If you don't change the world, no one will change it for you. Those who dare show what they are capable of. And finally, no one is a spectator. You are always choosing. Now, if somebody says they can't see the slides. Someone give me a thumbs up, you can see them. Thanks, Zach. So when I usually start my workshops with these quotes, it's usually at the point at which people are eyeing the door and thinking about escaping the room, because it is a challenge. And it is a challenge to choose to be in the room and to participate. And if we were all in the same room today, that's exactly what I would be asking you to think about, that every time we are here, we are choosing to participate and to do something, and choosing not to do something is also a choice. So just a little bit about, obviously, Boal and Freire. Freire very much influenced Boal. Boal wrote the Theatre of the Oppressed after reading Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And I think you have to kind of place them within the very particular context of which they both were in, the kind of the very unequal society and oppressive regimes in Brazil in the 60s. There was extreme wealth disparities in the middle of a brutal dictatorship. And Freire was obviously using literacy programs to engage farm workers in untangling oppression and empowering them to be kind of co-authors in defining their own history and reflecting through action. Whereas Boal was engaging with playwriting and directing, where he made connections for people among poverty, about poverty, between poverty, disempowerment, and the passivity that people are forced into through oppression by giving people a space. And he started very much from agitprop theatre, but then he realized he really was looking for a participatory model. And that's where theatre of the oppressed came from. And very much the idea to give people the stage and to discuss and rehearse revolution. And there's a nice paper by Kalidas recently where they talk about the legacy of the two pedagogues, as they call them. That they're both transgressive and a threat to the intended threat to the disrupted status quo, and that their work was about empowering people to challenge what was not formerly invisible. And I think this is an important point that actually, and Susan was talking about it as well, is that raising consciousness, formerly invisible oppressive structures, and providing spaces for the self to then become authors in those spaces. And they both, their work stems from the need from the transformation through social action, through unveiling these systems of oppression, and then by blurring those traditional lines very much between various actors, including actor and spectator, and teacher and student, and to create a new realities of praxis. So, and there's a very nice website on Beautiful Trouble, which gives kind of toolkits for working within Boal's theatre of the oppressed, and specifically forum theatre as well, and other areas too. So it talks about forum theatre being an effective tool for creative activism. It's useful for interventions, for making those interventions, and as an intervention itself. So depending on who you've got in the room, to participating in itself, that forum theatre activity can be an intervention, but it's also a way of building frameworks and movements, rehearsing and getting ready for moving out into the wider society and enacting those changes as well. So it was clearly Boal was also living in exile as well from Brazil because of the military dictatorship. But the context originally, of course, from his work started in a very harsh military repression. But equally, then since then, his work adapted to countless other areas and contexts within the world, as practitioners are kind of seeking to grapple the complicated power relations of more diverse groups of people. And there can be multiple layers of power, and that dramatizing of characters who are simultaneously oppressed and oppressing others. So there's this kind of blurring of lines between who is the oppressed and who is the oppressor in any given situation. I'll also give a link to this as well. So it's Beautiful Trouble also talks about analyzing the key moments. So what it does is it hones in on a particular areas and moments in time where of a certain situation, and it asks the participants to reflect on it and make an improvement. So what would you ask the question, what would you do? And it's a laboratory space where it brings together, again, it's about this praxis, bringing together theoretical strategy and practical action plans. So whether it be, for example, campaigns or tactics, or a specific situation that we're looking to impact change in. So what does it actually look like? Well, in forum theatre, an audience is shown a short play in which a central character, called a protagonist, encounters an oppression or obstacle led by an oppressor, the antagonist. And that oppression is something that they are unable to overcome. And the theme of the piece is normally something which is immediately of relevance to the audience. It's often based on some shared life experience. And when the play has been performed once, members of the audience can then intervene the second time that it's run through, and they can take the place of the protagonist, and they can act out on alternating paths and decisions. So they can literally change the scene and the fate and the agency of the individual, the protagonist. And there's a joker who is usually a member of the company. So actors are enacting the scene. There's somebody who kind of stands outside and leads the discussion with the audience and facilitates that interaction between the audience and the actors. So what would a classroom as participatory theatre look like? And indeed, who are the oppressors and the oppressed? Now, I'm going to actually just pause on that question. I'll let you think about that, because I will come back to it at the end. And I suppose one of the things I want to highlight is that I'm not the first person to do this by any means, and this has been used at all levels of education across the world, formal education and informal education too. And I'm just sharing some of my experiences, but there is a lot out there around this as a pedagogical technique. So how I do it as a workshop, and I must admit I'm a little bit loose with Boal's rules, mainly from a pragmatic point of view, because I don't have my own theatre troupe, unfortunately, to bring with me. So what I do is I actually use everybody in the room to participate and to be the actors. So what I normally do is I kind of create the space, and on a practical level, that is, it needs to be a room that's an open room that has movable furniture, so that there's a bit of space. There's a room for people to sit, preferably in an accessible circle or something like that, so people can jump up and move around. But there is a kind of performance area, and I very lightly but gently kind of establish a rules of engagement around, if you're here, we're anticipating that you will participate, and you are free to leave, but once you're in, there is a kind of a trust there. I run some warm-ups, which I'll come to in a minute. And then I will play the scene, and I provided a script, and I'm going to show you and do a little exercise with the script I've got today. But so we've got a very, very short script, and it's a single scene, and I ask people to come forward and read through it once, and then I ask people, they're going to ask people to run it a second time, and every time, and during that second run, I ask people the question, what would you do differently? And if there's anything in your brain that says, I'm not comfortable with that, I really need to move to do something, they put up their hands, say stop, and they say who they're going to replace, and they jump in and they take the place of that character on stage. And we take it from a particular point and we run it again. And then they have the freedom to then basically improvise the scene differently. And it's often followed by a discussion. Though one of the things that, in education, we just love talking. People often just want to talk about it. And it's quite difficult sometimes just to get people, I'm sorry, you have to stop talking about it. You have to just get up and do it. Stop telling me what you're going to do and actually get up and do it. And this is where it's really challenging, because it's about actually putting yourself literally in the shoes of someone else and acting out something as a character. Theatre games. What I would say about these is that I suppose there is a little bit of an idea and a myth around theatre games, and it comes from possibly jokes around really badly organized away days for teams who work in offices or whatever. So it's theatre games are very established as a way of bringing together a group of people. And they have a number of functions, and Boal's got a great book with loads of exercises in there around working towards getting a group of people to come together from being separate individuals to being a creative group within a single room within a period of time. And it's about focusing the body, warming up the body and warming up the mind as well, and then connecting to other people. So he goes through various exercises around building rhythm and melody, but also touching, movement, imagery and objects and so on, and use of mask. They're very well established, and it's just a great way of kind of focusing people into a single plan of action, which then by result of that builds trust, and it transforms the space into this temporary space where things can happen and people are safe to make suggestions and changes. So the wonderful Maha Bailey has written a little bit about using forum theatre and a number of other techniques as well around using, and she spoke specifically about teaching engineering ethics using theatre for oppressed. And I think this is a wonderful example, because you've got a very scientific discipline, then bringing it right up against a very kind of social sciences, soft performance-based discipline as well. So it's really a great example, and what she talks about it on her blog about how she takes a traditional role play or a scenario or she invites the students to write the script. And if you have the time to do that, that's a wonderful option as well. And then the students then act this out. And as they do, as I explained, you absorb it once and then you repeat, and then students intervene to change to a more ethical outcome. And she has suggestions actually for doing this online as well, which I think are quite interesting, again, with the time and space. I was only given 20 minutes here, so unfortunately I can't do it today, but she suggested using a live video, which you could do. You could use Zoom, you could change your name to play the different characters in your Zoom profile, or you could use a pre-recorded video, or a rather wonderful suggestion is using a Google Doc to write the script and then collaborate on that asynchronously. So you could have students actually rewriting scripts using the forum theatre models. And I think there's plenty of potential there as a way of kind of working with students over a longer period of time. So these are some of the conferences that I've done some forum theatre workshop on, and I know it probably sounds, how do you get academics, never mind students, to actually participate in this? But actually, once people are in the space, and I found that there's never been a situation where I've actually come across real problems with people not wanting to participate. Although obviously there was a voluntary nature to it, in that they could have not come to my sessions, because I always highlighted that they were participatory. But some of the topics that I've looked at has been assessment and feedback in higher education, looking at it from students' point of view, looking at where the oppression and oppressor might be within those. Digital education, and I've got a little reflection at the end I'd like to share with you about that too. And then also more generally about higher education and the critical debates that are happening at the moment in higher education. So there's so much options and material within higher education alone to kind of explore within this. So hopefully I'm giving you a few ideas. And I've got a lovely quote here from Wendy Teos, who says that laughter and recognition and laughter and pain in theatre, our emotions can gain a space, a voice, a life. As education changes and we question our roles, we can all join in laughter to break hierarchical trolls. So a smashing conversation was had on Twitter about that. All right, this is the bit where I'm gonna just ask you to grab a link from the chat. And I am going to read out a script. I'm going to read it out twice. I'm going to ask my beautiful assistant, Stuart, to join me in that. So we'll read it out once, just listen to it. Then we'll read it again. And this time, follow the link to Mentimeter. And we're asking you to think about, what would you do or say differently if you were the protagonist? So if you were the student, and I'm going to give you the link to the file as well, because I know this is not going to be very readable. I'm going to ask you to type in Mentimeter, the line number, and what you would say or do differently. So I'm going to move on to that. That is probably pretty illegible, so I'm going to share a file with you as well. Okay, so Stuart.
Hello.
How are you doing? Okay, I'm going to read the stage directions. So for the first run through this, we're just going to read it once. So just listen for the first time, okay? Scene 1, student assessment. Characters, lecturer, student. Location, lecturer's office. Student knocks on door. Yes?
Hi, you said I could come speak to you about the assessment.
Yes, come in, sit down. What can I do for you?
Well, I was wondering if there's any flexibility in what I could submit for the essay.
It depends what you're thinking about.
Well, I was wondering if I could make a website. I can see in my head now how I could show visually how the ideas link together.
It sounds like it could be confusing. How would I know if I missed bits?
I could create a site map so you'd be able to see everything.
I'm not sure. It sounds a bit of a gimmick. Is this something to do with your, what do you call it?
Dyspraxia. Yeah, I don't know, maybe.
You see, what I'm worried about is whether this would be fair on the other students. They don't get a choice in what they can submit, you see?
I see.
Look, why don't you take the website and make it anyway, but just copy and paste all of the text into a Word document and just submit that.
I was thinking some of it might be videos, or I've been making some pictures of the connections.
I'm afraid I won't be able to mark that. The point of the essay is I get to see how you're understanding the main concepts of the course and give you feedback on that.
Okay.
You're getting extra time for the final exam, aren't you?
Yes.
Yes. Well, you see, that's the kind of accommodation we can make, but I'm afraid we can't change the essay.
Okay. Thank you.
End of scene. Okay. I didn't say I was a great playwright to start with. So we're going to run that again. Has everybody been able to access the Mentimeter? Great. Okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change my screen so that it's showing the Mentimeter. Okay, someone's already started posting. Right. Okay. Now, if we were doing this in the room, you'd be shouting out stop and intervening and taking over, but we're just going to run through the scene a second time. Okay. Scene 1, characters, lecturer, student, location, lecturer's office. Student knocks on door. Yes?
Hi, you said I could come speak to you about the assessment.
Yes, come in, sit down. What can I do for you?
I was wondering if there was any flexibility in what I could submit for the essay.
It depends what you're thinking about.
I was wondering if I could make a website. I can see in my head how I could show visually how the ideas link together.
Sounds like it could be confusing. How would I know if I'd miss bits?
I could create a site map so you'd be able to see everything.
I'm not sure. That sounds a bit of a gimmick. Is this something to do with your, what do you call it?
Dyspraxia. I don't know, maybe.
You see, what I'm worried about is whether this would be fair on the other students. They don't get a choice in what they get to submit, you see?
I see.
Look, why don't you just make this website thing anyway and just copy and paste the text into a Word document and submit that.
I was thinking some of it might be videos, or I've been making some pictures of the...
I'm afraid I just wouldn't be able to mark that. The point of the essay is to see what you're understanding the main concepts of the course and give you feedback.
Okay.
You're getting extra time for the final exam, aren't you?
Yes.
Yeah, you see, that's the kind of accommodation we can make, but I'm afraid we can't change the essay.
Okay, thank you.
End of scene. Thank you, Stuart. Okay, can people see on my screen the answers people are putting in now, the ideas people are putting in? Brilliant, okay. I'll just take a little moment to scroll through that. Lovely, okay. I'm double checking across the lines. Some people have jumped in and using the lecture lines as well. Yes, the course was designed at UDL. Lovely. Universal Design for Learning. Yes, you see, this is where it's interesting, isn't it? Because it seems to be much easier to jump in and do the lecture. But what are the things that the student could say? Yeah, yes, it's my dyspraxia. Absolutely. Would this not be classed as a reasonable adjustment? Yes. Yeah, now number 16 here on the right-hand side, I'll be better able to demonstrate my understanding of the main concepts of the course by creating a multimedia project and writing an essay. Yeah. Yes, well, I like number 4 over here as well, while still showing my understanding of the material. So if we were doing this face to face and we had somebody who was playing the lecturer in this and somebody was jumping in, the lecturer would continue to say no. So it would be really about how do you actually get that character to change their mind, and how can that person be empowered to be their own advocate within that particular situation. These are wonderful ideas. I would question his use of the word gimmicky. Absolutely. And interesting, you thought it was a he. Seems like, yeah, okay. It's easier to be the lecturer. Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, everybody, for being so game with that. I would love to do this face to face with you, or even with a little bit more time, but we can't. So I'm going to go back to my slides. If I can find them. Nearly. Okay. I'm just going to stop sharing a second until I get that up. Okay, so the last couple of things I just wanted to kind of run past you were ideas around power and oppression, and particularly around digital education, because you know, that's become so ubiquitous over the last wee while in relation to things that we are, how we are teaching and how we are enacting learning and teaching, and maybe perhaps even unknowingly sort of thinking about systems of oppression or perpetuating oppression within digital education. So one of the things I'd say is, what about thinking about digital education as surveillance? And I think there's a lot to be thought about in relation to datafication of education. Now, I'm not an expert in this. There are loads of people who've done extremely good work around this. Ben Williamson is somebody that, if you're interested in this, it's definitely worth following up. But also performativity of education, and thinking about, well, you know, what are the things that we're asking students to do just because we can measure the clicks and so on. But also another thing is how we're allowing education and technology and education to kind of intercede in those relationships. Where is the power dynamic? Who's the oppressed and who's the oppressor? And whether we're displacing the relationship at the basis between teacher learner. The next point, I suppose, is around thinking about invisible oppression of education technologies. And I suppose in particular, this is around thinking about you know, the Silicon Valley model of education, follow the money in terms of educational technologies, and why we're using them, and how the sort of the application of social media ideas of stickiness, you know, and dopamine rushes and intermittent gratification, and how those are being, the behaviorist aspects of education technology, I suppose, are being embedded in some of the tools that are being co-opted into education at the moment. And I suppose the thing underneath that as well is the thinking about the pedagogical affordances within the technologies that we're using. So it might be worth kind of thinking about, again, just going back to those blurring of lines between the oppressor, the oppressed, the spectator, the actor. The spect-actor is what Boal called it, and maybe just thinking more about empowering students around this. Open practices as an act of resistance, and I think this is something that's very powerful, and in some areas, in particularly the global South and South America, that there's been a wonderful work done around open practices, and very much looking at that from a political perspective. Sharing in itself, it can be a very much a political act, breaking down those barriers between, you know, institutions, and working across different kind of hierarchies as a way of kind of acting as resistance, but also the transparency with students of this as well, and bringing that authenticity into the student experience, I think is something that has a lot of potential. And then finally, just around social justice and authentic situations. So thinking about that leading to activism and change. So we have forum theatre and theatre of the oppressed in these games, but it's the most important thing is, of course, that and maybe this goes to a deeper thing within education, is about equipping students as critical citizens, critical activists, and that it's not just something that's happening within classrooms, be they virtual or not, but actually taking them out into the real world. So I know there's a question there around open practices. I'm talking about open education practices and resources. It's a huge field, but we can come back and talk about that later, because I realize I've only got a couple of minutes left. So finally, you will notice on my next, I've got the next slide on Mentimeter, which is just asking people to put in some ideas about things that you might like to. What would you ideas? How would you use forum theatre, or maybe even some of the tools of forum theatre within education? And I'm going to leave that open for the rest of the day, so you can feel free to add in things there. I'm not going to share my screen on that. Those are my references. I will share the slides. You'll find them. I'll share them on Twitter, and I'll share them on my blog as well. But again, those are my details. I'm up for collaboration. If anybody is interested in doing this and they want somebody to buddy up with it, if you want to try it online or do other things, and I'm open for conversations. And with that, thank you very much. And thank you very much, Stuart.